Happy Halloween! I am Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing what is admittedly a somewhat silly Halloween hat. But today I am here to film, you guessed it, my Halloween video of the year, which is a book recs list. I did a Halloween book recs list back in, I think, 2018 that was called something like Kelsey's Eerie Fantasy Halloween Book Recs. And obviously, several years later, I think we are overdue for a sequel or update with some things I've read more recently. But because I haven't read that many books that really feel like seasonal Halloween reads since then, I have broadened the scope of this book recs list a little bit. My tastes remain more or less the same. I remain fairly averse to books with very graphic violence or blood and gore. A lot of overt horror will put me off. I vibe very strongly with dark fairy tale fantasy though, which definitely has those Halloween season vibes. I like moody autumnal atmosphere, beautiful writing more than I like overt in-your-face scares. But this is a list that includes books ranging from one actual adult horror novel all the way to a couple of much more lighthearted middle grade reads that do have some of those Halloween seasonal elements to them. I've got 6 books to recommend to you today, so let's get started. The first book, which you might have guessed because I talked about this in my last video that I posted, which was a wrap-up, is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is the one adult horror novel on the list. It is a very stylish, atmospheric Gothic novel. It takes place in Mexico in the 1950s. The heroine, Noemi, is a stylish socialite, and while it does get very dark, I didn't find there was anything in this I personally couldn't handle. In this book, Noemi arrives at the ancestral home of the family into which her cousin has married, and finds it full of creepy white men and unusual occurrences. I went into this not really knowing if it was going to end up having a strictly speculative fiction element to it or not, and I'm not going to spill the beans, but if, like me, you are primarily a speculative fiction reader, I don't think you will be disappointed in the genre approach that this book takes. The second adult novel I have on this list is the only really good example of a dark fairy tale fantasy that I have for you in this batch. That is All the Murmuring Bones by A.G. Slatter, which also has some of the same Gothic elements in it that Mexican Gothic was playing with. The mysterious, creepy family that used to get their wealth from silver mines that have dried up. The desperation to return to that glory, the exploitation upon which that wealth is founded. And in this book, it's told through a story about a young woman who comes from one such family and must escape it in order to gain her freedom. At the center of this book's folklore are the Mer, the magical people of the sea, but they are not the only creepy supernatural beings that Mirren encounters on her dark and harrowing journey. The next book I have to recommend is a classic that I would probably put more in the YA category than in the adult category. It's certainly a coming-of-age story. That is Tamsin by Peter S. Beagle. This is one of the books that I read back in 2019 during a period of time where I didn't end up doing a batch wrap-up, and so I have never talked about this book on my channel until now. It's a contemporary story for the time when it was written, which I believe was the late 90s. This is another book that has a decent amount of folklore in it, but I would categorize it more as a ghost story than as a fairy tale fantasy. It is slow-paced though. It takes a long time for the fantasy elements to actually make themselves known in this book. So brace yourself for that. This isn't one where you're going to be dumped into the spooky stuff right up front. And I think the thing that is most striking about this book is the narrative voice. It's told from the perspective of Jenny, who is 13, I believe, when the events of this book start, but she's telling the story from the perspective of a point in time several years later when she is a bit older and wiser. And this is very much a family story. Jenny is an American teenager whose mother gets married, and so she and her mother move to England to be with her stepfather's family. They move into an old estate and farm in need of a lot of repairs. It is not the sort of life Jenny wants to be living, and she has to work through a lot of resentment about the situation that manifests in very 13-year-old ways. Eventually, though, Jenny starts to encounter creatures of folklore and the ghost Tamsin, who is a girl who lived and died several hundred years prior. The mystery of Tamsin's past and what is keeping her tethered to the world interweaves the paranormal ghost elements with the local folklore elements, with the historical elements in a way that I really appreciated. These elements all went hand in hand very well. And this book also, I will note, has some excellent cat content. The other YA book that I want to recommend is Elatsoe by Darcie Little Badger. This is more of a fast-paced contemporary fantasy type of story. It's a supernatural murder mystery of sorts, featuring a Lipan Apache protagonist and themes of indigenous history and storytelling. This was also just a really incredibly well-written debut novel. I tend to set my bar fairly low for YA debuts these days, but Darcie Little Badger blew this one out of the water and is definitely a writer to watch. And then last on my list, I have my two more light-hearted middle grade reads, the first of which is Castle Hangnail by Ursula Vernon. This is the book you want to read if you want to have like warm and fuzzy feels about a spooky castle and like its spooky inhabitants who are really very good at heart and all deserve the best spooky love. This is about a girl named Molly who shows up to become the new Wicked Witch of Castle Hangnail and has to prove that she is capable of holding the job. This one is delightfully illustrated by the author and is fun for the whole family. The second middle grade book I'm going to recommend has a superficially, startlingly similar premise as Castle Hangnail, and that is The Dark Lord Clementine by Sarah Jean Horwitz. I have a full review of this on my channel. It was my Halloween video, I think 2 years ago, and this is about a girl who similarly has to take charge of a spooky castle and inheritance and prove herself not a wicked witch, but a dark lord. Clementine is the daughter of a dark lord and the heir to his title, and she has to step up when her father is cursed. She's grown up very isolated and alone and sees herself as being superior to the subjects that her father lords over, but she ends up, surprise, surprise, making a gaggle of friends in order to accomplish her tasks. This has, in addition to the fun spooky castle atmosphere and the presence of some witches that makes it appropriate for Halloween, a whole lot of other sort of classic recognizable fantasy tropes weaving into this story, which is an element of Horwitz's writing that I think makes her books fun for adult fantasy readers in addition to the younger target audience. If I remember correctly, this one gets a little more serious in tone than, say, Castle Hangnail as it progresses. This was definitely an underhyped release of 2019. If it sounds up your alley, I do recommend checking out my review. So there you have it. That is my Halloween book rec list for this year. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you're planning to, let me know what you think. Anyhow, I hope you're having a very nice day and a happy Halloween. That is all. Bye for now.